an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Haunting of Hill House, Season 1, Episode 2, Open Casket. In this episode, the story is centered around Shirley, and I won't lie to you guys, it took me an inordinate amount of time to realize that she's named after the author of the original novel. I'm a very dense girl sometimes. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Candace for commissioning this episode. Candace is here in the chat, and she is high AF. It's good times. I wish I was too, Candace. So, y'all, I did an impromptu live watch of this episode on the old Crowdcast because I really wanted to watch it that night. I was, really dying to know what happened next, but I was so afraid to watch it by myself, and I will tell you what, I don't regret it at all, and I think I may have to do that again more than one time. It was really hard for me, even with you guys there, it was really hard. And what's so awful, and for me this is the kind of thing that really gets to me, is when there's a long shot of something that really fools you into thinking they're going to do something, and then they don't do anything. Just leaving it and not actually giving the satisfaction of an outlet with a jump scare is more cruel than any other thing you could do. And I just am such a fucking sucker for it, y'all. Yeah. I will say, too, I had mentioned when I started this series that I had watched the first 2 episodes. I am going to tell you guys about something else that I am slightly spoiled on, and it's not like a major thing. But I must have seen up to the 3rd episode, because there is something that I have in my head that happened, and I think it's from this show, that doesn't happen in this episode. And if it didn't happen here, it has to be in the next one, because I know that I didn't watch any further than the 3rd one, max. And like I said, I don't remember almost anything about this show except for this one thing, which is that there is something in a pile of ash in a basement. Something that's either looks like it's moving or actually starts moving. Something, and that's the only thing about the show that I genuinely can remember about it, is that scene almost put me in the fucking hospital, and that also is why I stopped watching the show. When I thought about it the other day, I was like, yeah, all of the ladies looking very similar to one another. It was confusing and frustrating, but that wasn't why I stopped watching. The scene that I'm thinking of is why I stopped watching. I realized it was too scary. I couldn't do it. I was too much of a baby to just keep watching this by myself or with Owen. Like I said, Owen is not to be trusted when I'm watching scary shit, because he would like to try and fuck with me for fun. And I'm already very close to having a stroke whenever I'm watching anything that's scary. So you don't need to do that. You don't. It's just mean-spirited. So anyway, that was the thing that I remember that still hasn't happened yet. And guys, I am not 100%. It might have been the hornet's nest, but I don't think so. I feel like it was something else. Anyway, because the hornet's nest thing, there's a face and it looks like a pile of ash, and it feels almost basement-like even though it's a shed. So I might be thinking of that, but I don't know. So anyway, I just wanted to let you all know that I maybe saw further than I thought, but that does not change the fact that I remember fucking nothing. So, okay. this, everybody's talking about starting a spoiler chat for this. Oh, this is why I wish that I could have gotten Discord to work. I should maybe give that another try so that spoiler chats are easier for people to access. Let me know if y'all are interested in me doing that again, because I gave up on it, but now it's beginning to become a thing for like my wedding planning and whatnot. I know Candace loves Discord, and Alex Irwin had been a major factor in trying to get those set up, and he was really good with it, and I felt bad because he was doing all this work, but very few people were really taking advantage of it. So anyway, I'll put that on the back burner, but this episode is, like I said, very Shirley focused. I am kind of figuring that we're going to get like an episode per sibling to figure out what happened to each of them individually. And I enjoy this version of storytelling for two reasons. One, because it's a nice way to unroll a mystery and give us some info without giving us all of it, without it feeling really manipulative that they're keeping parts of the information away from you. It makes sense that we don't have all the info because this sibling doesn't have all the info. We're just getting what they know about. So it feels very organic if you're going to build in this kind of thing. Secondly, I really like that because we're getting just each sibling's story, and this is again just my theory on how things are probably going to be handled. If we're getting each of their stories sort of separately, there is something about choosing to tell the story that way that emphasizes how isolated they are from one another. Their stories are intertwined in the past, but they have clearly gone their separate ways in a lot of ways by now. You know, the only one that had been, it felt like Shirley tried to stay in contact as much as she could before things began to go way too left. First with Steve, and then with, we see her doing Nell's makeup this episode for her wedding, so I'm assuming that Nell was probably the one that she stayed the closest to for the longest time. And there's just a sense of her being the oldest sister that maybe she had been trying the most to keep everybody together, because when you see her as a child, she seems really serious. You know, there's a sense of like growing up a little bit too quickly and taking on responsibility that I really think that whoever cast the little girl is very good, because she looks like the older actress, but she has the same sort of energy too, which is a really hard thing to sort of capture. And the actress that plays the younger version of her is really believable as a kid that's got a lot on their mind, is sort of the way to say that I feel like is the most diplomatic. Because sometimes a kid that is trying to act like they're older than their age can come across as a little bit too precocious in a way that's not charming. And there's nothing like that with her. You know, she feels genuinely like a little girl that's really trying to like be in charge as much as she can. So I really liked this episode for getting to know who Shirley is specifically. And it makes a lot of sense in some ways that we start with her after we see Steve. Steve is the one who's investigating all of the ghostly stuff. So the show sort of has to kick off from his POV because he's the one that's sort of involved in the paranormal on purpose in his day-to-day life. But the fact that he had never seen a ghost up until the very end of this episode is what makes that a compelling opening for everything. Plus, actually being the oldest, but us getting to see that he doesn't really take being the oldest seriously as far as a responsibility. And I say that in that's clearly what Shirley expects him to do as the oldest. I don't think it should be taken for granted that the oldest be in charge of the rest of the siblings, because, like, they didn't choose to be the oldest. And, you know, like, we're all grown. It shouldn't have to be that way. But I still understand Shirley's point of view, because she clearly feels like everything gets put on her. And from what we see, it sort of seems she's right about that. So Miss T, precocious in a way that's not charming. I feel called down. Sorry. Candace says Shirley has judged Steve and has found him wanting, so she's taking on the oldest role as well as oldest sister role. No one asked her to. That's just who she is. Yeah. And that's really the vibe that she gives off as a child. So it makes total sense to see her as an adult, having done what she's done, taking the position that she does. There's almost the sort of vibe of like oldest child of an alcoholic who feels like they have to raise their family because their parent is absent. And considering that her mother dies, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that she winds up sort of taking that role on, because their father, I wouldn't be surprised if he is in no state to actually raise them. So I was sort of on their dad's side based on what I saw in flashbacks of how protective he was of his kids. And I was wondering, what's the deal with everybody being so angry at him? And I'm looking at this from a different perspective now, because obviously they all have very little relationship with him, it seems to me. I could be wrong because we don't have a ton of info yet, but I couldn't help but imagine if you aren't given an explanation of what happened and all of the suspicion is being thrown at your father as to what happened to your mom, you're going to have to be a little bit suspicious. You know, there's a logical way that most murders of women play out, and it is most often a partner. And if they don't fucking know what happened, and everybody's saying, your dad tried to say it was a ghost, I could see all of his kids growing up, learning more about the story, and beginning to wonder, oh wow, yeah, that sounds like horse shit. Oh my God, did my dad kill my mom? Did he? Because, you know, there's going to be like maybe Nell believed him that there was a ghost involved, because Nell clearly was the one that was feeling shit in that house. Maybe Luke did also, and that's why they're twins. There's a bond between them, and he's the one that's like dealing with addiction, and that Nell was specifically calling everybody about, saying that she was worried about him. The two of them could be the ones that know the most that their dad was probably telling the truth. And the rest would be like, yeah, I'm good. I don't think that's anything. But so anyway, I just with this I have to get to the actual episode and what's going on. So the episode starts off with this little boy again being told about going to see his grandmother at the funeral, and they're going to be having a viewing, so she'll be in an open casket. This was weird, and this is something that, like, I really have mixed feelings on, because I feel strongly that forcing a kid to see a dead relative isn't the way to go. The fact that they are pressuring this kid so much to go to the viewing, for me, isn't appropriate. I don't understand what they're trying to accomplish here. The only thing I can imagine is that because we see Shirley's POV in the past, she is worried that her mother is going to look a certain way if she sees her in the casket, and is delighted, and I say delighted with an asterisk, relieved really, that her mother looks like herself in the casket after all. So that this image she has of seeing her mother dead is sort of eclipsed by the memory of who she looked like when she was alive and who she looks like when she's being buried. And Shirley seems to be under this impression that this little boy is suffering the same sort of issue that she was. That he just has a memory of what his grandmother looked like locked in his mind that needs to be superseded by a new memory. But this boy is very clearly talking about a ghost coming and sitting on his bed. And the problem here is that Shirley doesn't believe that's what's happening. We as viewers are like, that bitch a ghost. She coming and sitting there. She doesn't have her teeth. She doesn't have her wig. she's coming and sitting down and visiting. That bitch a ghost. And Shirley thinks this is your memory and your dreams kind of merging together with vague thoughts of what she looked like when she took her teeth out for you, because you knew that she like did that a couple times to make you laugh, or you knew that she had no wig, or you saw her without a wig at one point. So because she thinks that this is all in his head, to a degree, I can understand what she's attempting to do. But because I feel from where I'm sitting, that bitch a ghost, it seems like, yeah, okay, he's going to see his grandmother in her casket, which he didn't want to see in the first place, confirming the fact that that bitch is dead, and then he's going to go home and she's going to visit at the side of his bed again, and it's going to be even more traumatizing because he just saw her in a casket, so what the fuck is she doing here? And I just don't think that forcing a kid to see something like this, that is this major, a loved one in a casket, I don't know that I feel it's the way to go. I don't really get... I understand where Shirley's coming from because of her personal experience, but if I were his parents, I would genuinely want my child to be not traumatized. You know, I would be very strongly trying to shield them if I could. He's young enough still that it just feels to me like, yikes, you know? Let's see. Candace says, I personally would not make my kid do this, but it's possible they believe their son is being traumatized by his nightmare version. So they think that making him look will chase off the bad intrusive thoughts. True. And let's see. Ariel says it felt like she was being his therapist. In the real world, that would have been wildly inappropriate for all parties involved. Candace said, also, I didn't ever have the thought that Grandma was a ghost, LOL. Candace, are you high? Well, actually, oh my God, you are. Of course she's a ghost. She's coming and sitting on the side of his bed and stroking his hair, even though he told her that he doesn't want her there. She's a ghost. What are you talking about? Yeah. She says, okay. And Ashley says, I don't know. I mean, we as viewers are also well aware that it's a horror show. I feel like they could also be playing on that expectation. I think it could go either way. It could not go either way. That bitch a ghost. That's it. It's going on a t-shirt. But anyway, so this whole thing, like I said, this is interspersed with us finding out about the way that they handle the body, and we get to see shots of Shirley embalming the grandmother and doing her makeup and attempting to make her look like herself. And then we have this scene with Shirley in her mother's, I don't know if it's a study exactly, or if she's in like the sort of living room area, but her mom is drawing a blueprint of the dream house that they hope to build one day when they have sold, what do you call it? Hill House. Keep wanting to say Bly Manor. Forgive me. And she talks about the fact that a kitchen, or not even that a kitchen and dining room, she talks about how for this house, the dining room is going to be the heart of the house. And she talks about it like it's a living body, and says it's the heart, and then the pipes and the walls are like the veins, and the walls are the bones. And honestly, I found this kind of compelling. I really liked this idea, especially, of course, considering that Hill House is meant to be like alive in some way. There's a very serious presence to the house itself that in the books, it's not that it's haunted. It's the house itself that something is wrong with, you know? So, and she says, when you're little, you see things that aren't there, and when you grow up, you learn how to make them real. Which, I swear to God, I know she's trying to be, like, encouraging here, but that's the scariest shit I ever heard. I really hated that line. It just felt super foreboding to me. You know, just like, oh yeah, you'll see things that aren't real, but when you're a grown-up, they'll be real, all right. Like, thank you, I'm good. So, yeah, she points out, like, where Shirley's room is going to be. And she says, like, once we're done fixing up this house. And Shirley says, and sell it for a lot of money. And her mother seems a little taken aback by the fact that Shirley understands exactly what it is they're doing, which is sort of funny because she's like 12 years old, and that's not a wild concept to understand as a kid. But yeah, she tells her, if we are able to sell this house and build another one, we will never have to move again. And Shirley smiles at her in such a way because obviously moving around has been a bit of a problem for them. This has been a bit tedious as a family. And I can only imagine when you're dealing with 5 kids, yikes, that's a lot, you know? So this is when Nellie comes up and asks if they can do a tea party, and we have Shirley sort of agreeing to go outside to play, and her mother telling them that porch light means it's time to come home. When it blinks twice, it's time to come back. And this is a thing that gets repeated a few times in the episode so that we are certain to notice at the very end when the model of the forever house that Shirley has blinks twice, the front porch light on the model, that means something, right? So this is when we go outside and we have this sound that sort of draws Shirley over to this shed. Shirley's wandering around taking photos too. She's got like a Polaroid camera. And I am really not excited to see all of the things that turn up in these photos, because I have to imagine that once we get a real look at a lot of them, there are going to be fucking people hanging around in the background, and I am going to be very, very unhappy about all of it. So yeah, this is also when she walks to the shed, she passes by little baby Luke, who is so fucking cute, and he is the one that sees a little girl who's like waving at him from this chimney that's just a ways off from the house. It's like far enough off that I'm not really sure what the chimney is for. I'm like, it could be that had been a servant's quarters. It could be that there had been like, I'm not sure. Do we know where the house is in the country? Is it in the Northwest or the Southeast or where? Candace says East Coast. Oh, okay. Because I know especially in like southern areas where the heat would get really intense, when houses were originally built, a lot of them had kitchen buildings that were separate from the house so that the heat from all of the cooking wouldn't fill the rest of the house. So I was like, maybe that used to be a kitchen building. I don't know. But it looks like a real big chimney. And this little girl being next to it, I don't know. I just feel like that's bad. I don't like it. So yeah, this is when Shirley finds the kittens. And at first when she finds them, I was already like, something's going to be wrong with these things. And it's not right away. They really build up to that. But I appreciate that watching this live helped with some misunderstandings visually that I had about what was going on here. Because she wakes up in the morning after feeding these cats, and one of them is dead. And this is like the first encounter that she has with death. And her parents take her outside to bury the kitten in a box. And it's just a really nice bit of... It's the kind of scene where you get to see like what her parents are really like in moments of intensity, what it is that they say to her and how they handle her questions. And they ask if she wants to say anything about the kitten, because people often do. and generally sort of give her space to, like, process this, and they take it seriously in a way that I appreciate. And she asks to see the kitten in the box, and her mom looks at her dad and is sort of like she doesn't know if that's a good idea. But her dad just sort of nods, like, just let her, because she is the one who found the baby dead. And it feels a little bit weird to me to be like, no, you can't, after she was the one who found and carried the dead kitten already. Like, she's already had her encounter with it. You may as well. Of course, there's no way they could know how this was going to go. But she's holding the dead kitten, or she's looking at it in the box and sees it sort of move. And she thinks that the movement means that it's actually alive. And it's so awful, you guys. She's holding it, and it's all CGI, so it looks really weird in the moment. But she is, she's watching the little body, like, move around, and this fucking huge beetle comes out of the kitten's mouth. And it doesn't make any sense that this kitten just yesterday was eating food and alive, and now there's a giant beetle inside it. It doesn't make sense, but it is extremely horrifying in the moment. So, okay, that's fine. And then later on, all of the kittens turn up dead except for one, which she picks up, and the kitten opens its eyes, and she's like, at least this one is still alive. And when it opens its eyes, they are white. And I had to assume at first when I saw this, when I was watching with everybody, that it was a supernatural thing. That they were white because of something, like, had possessed the kitten. I don't know. Later on, I saw in the chat that somebody said that they thought it was maggots. I'm looking at it right now, and I don't think that's it. I think it's just meant to be that something is wrong with the kitten, like it's clearly blind or has a birth defect of some kind, because the eyeballs look like eyeballs. It doesn't. I'm gonna screen share right now just so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. But sorry, everybody. But yeah, that looks like eyeballs to me. So I think it's just that the cat, something was wrong with the cat, It's just really startling and horrifying, and I hated it so much. And I feel so bad for poor Shirley. Later on, we see her parents sort of fighting over the fact that her father should not have allowed her to bring them in the house. And on the one hand, I understand her feeling like this, but on the other hand, I mean, I don't think I could have personally, just setting aside the children, I think that I couldn't have left them out in that shed either. Especially, they talk about hearing dogs at night, which Mr. Dudley is like, we don't have dogs on the property. And he's like, yeah, you do. We hear them all the time. And I was like, ooh, ghost dogs. Okay. But yeah, I don't blame him for agreeing to bring the cats inside. And I'm not trying to say that it's always a good idea. I have a friend actually just today who posted about how she brought in a stray and now her baby has ringworm because the cat had ringworm and brought it in the house. So yeah, I mean, it can definitely be a fucking problem. But it was just a really one of those fights where I understand her being angry at him, especially after the fact, since things go very wrong. But in the moment, I don't blame him for that choice at all. It's especially in the kind of house this is, this place is so wide open to the elements in so many areas already, it feels like, because it's just under such disrepair, that I wouldn't be surprised if they found a litter of kittens in the house, you know? But anyway, so when she tells Shirley about it later, she's talking to Shirley and she tells her that we gave the kitten away. And this is just, you know, one of those where if Shirley weren't who she is, maybe her mother could have gotten away with this. But Shirley's really smart and acute and obviously has an adult understanding to a degree of certain things. So she fucking smells a rat right away and tries to press a little bit and then starts to get really angry because she feels like they just took this, it was the only one that was even alive, and they took it away and didn't say a word to her about it, and now they're just talking to her about how it's gone. And she feels a way about it, and I don't blame her, you know, and I think that her mother knows that it was a mistake to try to lie, and also that maybe they should have handled this differently, in general. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but yeah, it's it's a weird moment because as she's yelling at her mother, her mom has an attack that she calls later a color storm. And this is something that I think, Candace, you mentioned in the chat. Your mother used to call them that, her migraines. And this is what's so interesting to me about migraines is the fact that they manifest very differently in different people. Everyone has like their own unique special brand of migraine. And for me, I have never had a color, like, because that sort of thing, colors very specifically, I have heard of being one of the precursors. And another thing that's called sort of an aura, just generally your sight being affected is a common symptom. But that has never really been the thing for me. My thing is I get very shaky. And I feel really like I was spinning with my eyes closed. That sort of like wheeling feeling. And I feel really sick to my stomach. It can be either actual nausea where I vomit, which is the most common for me, is vomiting, or it can be this general feeling almost like if you've gone too long without eating, and that sort of weakness and shakiness that you get when your blood sugar drops way too low. And that's always been how I feel right before, and I get the chills and sweats really bad. And actually, I just had a migraine yesterday, and it was really weird because I caught it. I woke up at like 3 a.m., realized it was coming, chugged some milk, and took some ibuprofen, to, like, the milk to line my stomach so I wouldn't throw up, went back to bed, woke up a few hours later, ate, drank caffeine, took some Excedrin migraine, and so the pain of the migraine didn't ever actually hit. Not too badly. It was there, but it wasn't like it can be. However, all the other symptoms were still there. The shaking, the sweating, the chills, the vertigo, all were still there. And it was just wild to experience all of that minus the pain. It was just a really weird experience, and it made me think of, like, because for a lot of people, the actual headache part of the migraine doesn't come for, like, days. Sometimes those symptoms, the precursors, will happen days ahead of time. And that's for people who have the really unfortunate type of migraine that can last for days and days. I've had migraines last for max 3 days, and that was the worst I've ever had. And that was a record for me. But there are people for whom that's common, and I just can't. My heart goes out to them because nothing is like a migraine. It just lays you out. There's nothing to be done, you know? So yeah, this scene where it comes on really suddenly, she's just mystified by this. And when she's talking about it with her husband later, first of all, he mentions that it's been a long time since that happened to her. And secondly, she describes it as much different than they normally are. And she says it was like fireworks behind her eyes, but blackness, which I have to assume is meant to be a hint that some shit is going down with the house trying to get a hold of her somehow. Because I am operating under the assumption that she winds up possessed somehow by the end of things. And possessed can mean a lot of things. I'm just going to go with that as shorthand for right now. Whether it's that she had her own like actual mental break and it just looks like it's the house, but it feels like if we're going to take things in the way that they are done in the book, it sort of seems like the house finds somebody who is the most impressionable and open to potentially having a break, and then sort of works on them and attempts to like get them in the hopes that if they get that one, then they'll sort of get everybody else potentially. So this for me feels like an attack that's happening from the house. That's my theory. So yeah, so this again is a very Shirley-centric story, and we get this like look at her mother and father's conversation, but obviously Shirley can't know about this. You know, we know about this as viewers, but she doesn't know. The only reason we're seeing what Shirley dealt with as a kid is to have a better understanding as to why she runs a funeral home herself now. So this brings us to what is up with her in the present in this episode. She is very fixated on doing her sister's funeral and embalming and doing the makeup of her sister herself. And this is one of those things that I find really, like, I don't want to even say that it's not good writing, because I feel like that's more of a judgment call than I'm willing to make. But her husband and her sister are both acting like the fact that she wants to do this is absurd and putting so much pressure on her as to be like almost indicative of like, go get therapy. This is a really bad impulse to the point of being damaging to you. And to a point, I can understand that in a vague, like, but the thing is, throughout history, most people haven't had funeral homes to deal with their dead. It's been family who copes with their own dead. And her impulse to care for her own sister, in my opinion, makes complete sense. And if I were running a funeral home and my mother unexpectedly died, because I don't have siblings, that's the closest I can think of, you bet your ass I would want to fucking handle her myself. Are you high? Like, of course I would. It's not like she isn't a funeral home director and is like, no, I must handle my sister's burial myself. She's a fully trained professional with a location and equipment and is positioned to do this. What is the problem? And I just don't see any reason to have this like intensely harsh judgment of her that they have. I found it weird that they didn't seem to understand the desire for her to connect with her sister this one last time, because obviously you get into this business because of the fact that you respect the dead and understand how important it is to family. So if they don't see why she'd want to do this herself, it feels like they just don't understand her as a person very well, you know? And obviously also there's just the fact that Shirley is a bit of a control freak, like just as a person as well, and has a sense of control regarding her sister's body, which is, I mean, as somebody who is also a control freak, I can understand that. So yeah, we have this whole scene of them bringing in her daughter's body, and Theo doesn't want to be there. She like tries to be there for her sister's delivery, but she can't do it, and she winds up bailing. Don't blame you, Theo. And then we have her emptying the body of internal organs and stuff. And I really love this scene where Steve calls her whining about trying to get Dad on a flight. I don't even remember what the fuck it is, but she yells at him something like, I am elbow deep in our sister's chest cavity right now, and all you have to do is get them on a plane. Shut the fuck up and go do your goddamn job, you pathetic piece of shit, is the subtext. Not very really. And I swear to God, I wanted to cheer. I think I may have cheered when I was watching it, because this is so, like, this is a woman's experience so much of the time in the world, is we are given everything to do, and a dude will be given like 2 jobs out of the 40 necessary for any given event, and they will still come to you. Well, I don't really know how to do this. Figure it out! Oh my God! Figure it out! Shut the fuck up and go figure it out. I don't care. Do you think I just knew how to do all this other shit? No, I figured it out. Because nobody was ever there to wipe my ass for me. So shut up and do it. I just love her so much. I swear to God, I was so irritated with him as well. Just get them in a car and stop calling me. You know, like, oh man. So those of you who watched me in the live watch know that the scenes where she's cleaning up her sister, those were the worst ones. I was so sure her sister was just gonna fucking sit up at one point, just like a cartoon vampire in a coffin, sort of sit up, like one of those like supreme ab control sit-ups that I certainly can't do anymore. And oh God, the camera kept lingering and pulling back and leaving all this space, and I was just freaking out because it just felt like it was going to happen any second. And we have the one moment where she thinks she sees a bug climbing out of her sister's mouth, and she backs away. And it's just another instance of like, her and her whole family are obviously trying to leave what happened in that fucking house in the past, but that shit isn't in the past. That shit is right here. That thing happened like 25 years ago, and she's still thinking about it. And it's still enough in her mind that this illusion in front of her face seems convincing enough for her to like back away in a panic, you know? It wasn't even anything, and it was still awful. And as we are watching her, as she finally gets done emptying her sister's chest cavity and cutting open her head to take her brain out, which I swear to God, she gets her all sewn up and tidied up and everything all over again, and then begins to do her makeup. And this is when we get a flashback of her doing Nellie's makeup when she was still alive, obviously, on her wedding day. I don't remember who she's marrying. Did we meet the guy that she's marrying? I don't know if we met him or not. But she is positioned in such a way, evidently, that like she can look out the window and see, but Nellie can't. That was the only thing about this, is the fact that I felt like it was really obvious that she turns and looks out the window and gets a disapproving expression. And Nellie is like, what's the matter? And I'm like, all she'd have to do is turn and see, and she doesn't. And it was one of those moments where Nellie is meant to be really perceptive, I think, a lot of the time. And yet in this moment, she completely doesn't see what's happening. And I was like, this doesn't really ring true for me. Right. But I don't know her that well. I got the impression that the show wanted me to see her as perceptive. You know what I mean? So it doesn't really matter. What we're supposed to get from this is that Nell doesn't know that Luke came to the wedding. And as we saw later, Shirley is still saying to this day that Luke missed the wedding. She has never told anybody, evidently, that he showed up and she sent him away. And on the one hand, I kind of want to be like, girl, tell him what happened. But on the other hand, I can understand why she perceives showing up high as a kite doesn't really count as actually showing up. You know what I mean? And I'm really curious if she's right about how Nell would have reacted. You know, would it have been best for him to not be there? Or would she have appreciated the effort of him showing, even though it would have grieved her to see the state he was in? It's kind of, it depends on the person. And I think it depends on, like, what's happened recently and their attitude right now. Because I have dealt with people who have addiction in my family and in my friends group. And I have gone sort of back and forth on whether or not I want to, like, see them when they are under the influence or be around them when they're under the influence. It can really depend on the situation. And a part of me feels like Nellie seems so bummed at the fact that he didn't come at all that I almost think letting him show, even if he were high, might have been slightly better for her in the short term. But in the overall grand scheme of things, what's going on here, as we find out, is that Luke is supposed to be in rehab right now. And he's lying about the fact that he's still there, when in fact Shirley was the one who got the call that he disappeared. So he's thinking he's getting one over on her, when in fact he ran off. And as we saw in the scene when he first gets admitted, that shit is $6,000 a month. Now, guys, I'm just going to try really hard not to devolve into a fucking rant against the United States healthcare system and our handling of addiction. I'm really going to try. But even outside of addiction, just like any mental health issue is just so obscenely expensive. And I have a family member who really recently had kind of a breakdown, and they were getting outpatient therapy, and it was the first place that they went to was quoting them over $1,000 a day for outpatient therapy. They wound up getting treatment for about, I think it wound up being $3,000 for 15 days. And long story short, I think a lot of you saw that I sold a bunch of episodes covering Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood ahead of time. And it was a really helpful thing because I contributed to them paying off their treatment. Using that like pre-sale basically, because otherwise it was all on a credit card, and that's not a great way to deal with your mental health, is to watch your debt mount and cope with that. So I felt like that was something that I could do. It was one of the few things within my control over the situation, was to help them to pay it. And I will never cease to be so angry over the fact that we tell people get help, and that's the help, and it's that kind of money. And this moment where she and Steve are trying to show up for Luke. They are trying to be as supportive as they can. But $6,000 a month is not something that almost anybody out there can spare. The vast majority of people don't have that fucking sitting around. Like, so we see how she's willing to try and set up a payment plan. She's going to invest in her brother getting better in that scene, committing in a way that few people's families would be willing to do. So by the time he shows up to this wedding, the way that she talks about it, it sounds to me like they have been through this I'm paying for your rehab rigmarole more than once now. I don't even get the impression that he's run away from the treatment center we just saw him in. It feels like this is maybe the second time he's left a treatment center, or maybe even the third time. There's an exhaustion to her that is, it's so resentful, you know? And that's the problem with the way that things work in this country, is people don't want to stand by someone with addiction because they have to put themselves at risk, and putting themselves financially at risk is that's a life or death situation in a lot of cases, like that's no joke. And if somebody doesn't actually keep doing the program and they don't fully commit to it, then it can just feel like you've flushed your money down the drain, and this person is kind of like throwing it in your face because they'll continue to be high right around you when they know what you did. And those people, the person suffering the addiction does not want you to feel like they're not enjoying it, but they can't help in some ways what's going on with them. It's just the fucking worst. Addiction is the worst. There's no good way to handle it that is available to a lot of people because our country doesn't give a shit. That's just really what it comes down to. Our country just doesn't give a shit. So yeah, this whole thing is just really hard because she's harsh with him when he shows up. But once she starts saying like, oh, the rehab called me. I don't know if you realize, but I'm your fucking emergency contact. So yeah, nice try pretending that you're fucking still going. But I can literally see you in front of me right now, high as a kite, shaking with circles under your eyes and you're sweating. I know what the fuck's happening. And she gives him the money out of her wallet and is like, get the fuck out of here. Get lost. I am not telling her that you even came. Don't you come around here again. We are not helping you anymore. Bye. And I can't blame her. I can't. It's a really hard position to be in, especially when you just barely have it to spare in the first place, like me just talking about using the pre-sales to pay off treatment for somebody. I would feel a way if it seemed like they were not committed to their program and if they weren't taking it seriously after I had put that much money toward it. I have never paid for any program for myself that cost that kind of money. So I can't lie. I would be really upset if I saw that person had just decided to sort of ditch out on it. I would be really angry and feel really taken advantage of. And it's not even as much money as she was spending. And it seems like I said, like this is a repeat thing. So anyway, he agrees to go, and as we know, she has stuck to her stories ever since that he just never showed up, which I can't blame her for because it really doesn't feel like he did. Not really. He didn't show up. His fucking addiction showed up. And there's also another thing going on with Shirley here, which is that she finds a checkbook in her husband's briefcase that is for an account that she didn't know about. And I have to imagine that this is sort of linked to his conversation with her earlier on in the episode, because he talks to her about the fact that she isn't charging people enough. She is extremely aware of how much funeral expenses cost and that not everybody can afford them. And so she tries to make it easier for people who are in circumstances that are difficult. But she tries to tell him that it's special circumstances, and he points out that according to their records, more than half their clients are being treated as special circumstances, which that's not special anymore. If it's over half, that's the majority, and that's just how you operate your business. And he says that while they are in the black, it's really close, and they cannot be operating this way anymore. So the fact that he has this checking account, my immediate assumption was that he doesn't trust her in the way that she's handling the books, and he is pulling money as backup into this other account because he feels like he doesn't have confidence in the way she's handling things. And that's a pretty charitable assumption. I will admit, if I found Owen had a secret bank account, I mean, honestly, we don't have joint accounts, so it really wouldn't mean anything to me. But let's say we did, and I found out he had a secret account. I'd be very curious about it. I don't know how upset I would be, but I think I would sort of assume that he was saving up something for me, that he was like going to surprise me with something. And I know a lot of people don't have that sort of like relationship. So the fact that she goes to, well, what the fuck, is he like gonna leave me? Like, that often is what people think of. If there's a secret account, it means that you're stashing money so that you can get out of this relationship and have your own money to draw from. That's certainly what I would think if he were a woman, you know? Because women are especially like vulnerable in situations where they're trying to get out of a relationship, and oftentimes do things like that. But because of the financial conversation they just had, I just link them in my mind, and either he's actively embezzling money, which, if her husband is embezzling from her business, that is really some fucked up shit. Or he doesn't trust her, and he's set something else up that he isn't telling her about. And that would be very insulting, but also it doesn't seem like she wants to hear the fact that she needs to actually charge people. So in some ways, I can't blame him. I guess we'll find out. And then there is another thing. Now, she sees this, there's a guy who brings in a, like, jewelry box full of his grandmother's jewelry, because she's going to be taking care of grandmother's makeup and everything. And he couldn't decide on what to bring, so he brought her a box full of stuff. And behind him, in this sort of like lobby that's right outside her office, she sees a man sitting down, I think drinking a cup of coffee. And it's weird because she has a sort of attitude throughout this episode as if she doesn't believe in ghosts. But then there's this moment where it really feels like she's straight up just looking at a ghost. This man, either it's in her head and it's just a strong memory. I don't think so, though. Because the way that she's tuned out the man standing in front of her, because she's staring, to me it seems like there is something actually there that she didn't expect to see. It's not just like a memory. So her attitude about like not seeming to believe in the supernatural at all, or this, just the being in denial of it, I don't really know what to make of it. And I don't know who this person is, you know, as well. I can't remember if that's like meant to be her brother in that scene or what. I'm trying to go back so that I can see the moment, because yeah, he looks like I'm trying to get a good shot of him on the show. Yeah, I don't know. This man doesn't look particularly familiar to me. Maybe we aren't supposed to know who he is yet. But yeah, he is sitting there on the couch and like turns and looks at her in a way. And he has a glass in his hand that he like raises to her. And she looks away and she looks up again and he's gone. So, don't know. And there's one other scene that I haven't really talked about yet from the flashbacks, is she gets up and goes to her sister's room and is yelling at her. I think it's Theo. What do you want? You've been pounding on the wall. And Theo's like been dead asleep and is like, no, I haven't. What are you talking about? And at that moment, the pounding begins again, and it travels all the way around the room. And it really just sounds like there is somebody on the other side of the wall just bashing on it, like full out with their fist. And all the pictures and everything are jumping off the walls for a second, and they're screaming, wrapped around each other on the bed. And then their father comes running in, and they're like, didn't you hear that? And he says no, and they're like, what the fuck? How could you not have heard that? And he tells them that it's the pipes. One of those like incredibly unsatisfactory answers. And I have to assume that there's been other supernatural shit. So I don't know if it's like the house has erased the memory that they have of certain things, because that memory, it doesn't really feel like when we see it that we're getting, like, I can't determine how much of it we're getting from her and how much we're seeing independent of her memories. You know what I mean? Like, are we as viewers seeing a memory that Shirley herself has forgotten about? Or are we seeing something that, because it's the way that it's cut, there are times where there's a clear, like, link between the memory and what's happening to her right now. So we understand why this thing came to mind. But for this memory, that doesn't really happen. So I was just very curious about whether or not this is something that she actually remembers herself, because it just doesn't seem like she's super patient about the whole ghost idea. So yeah, I'm sorry I jumped around so much on this episode, you guys, but there's just a lot of sort of pieces of the puzzle that don't really feel linked to other things yet. So I am really curious about where they're all going to get put together, you know? Yeah, so that's everything, I think. And I'm going to have to wrap up. But thank you guys all so much for hanging out with me. Oh my God, you know what, I forgot. But there really isn't much to be said about it. I forgot the very final scene when she has finished with her sister and she is leaving the mortuary, and she sees her mother on one of the tables, and her mother, like, sits up, does the thing that I had been thinking her sister was going to do the whole time. And she looks like a corpse. She's got either blood or dirt or who knows what all over her front. And she's holding the box that the kitten had been buried in her lap, which I thought was significant. And she, like, lifts it toward her in this way with this smile on her face that feels really sort of malicious. And the box lid jumps open, and that's when Shirley turns and flicks the light on, and there's nothing there. It's very, very unpleasant. I did not care for it. I think I purposely blocked it out, and that's why I almost forgot to mention it. So, now I will wrap. But yeah, thank you again, everybody. I will let you all know if I'm going to do another live watch again. If I do, I'll probably try and do it Monday or Tuesday, because I record on it on Tuesday. But I'd rather do it in the evening when I can have a drink. So, you know, if I'm able to, I will try and let y'all know. And no promises, but... And stay tuned on the old Facebooks and Twitters and whatnot, because I will let you know there. All right, everybody. Until next time. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.